there is so much to be said, like you said, about encouraging our children and our youth to start that quest earlier on, and to look at like what those lives, what those ways of being will become. But at the same time, even when you're 3/4 or at the top of the ladder, this is where time is, this time is this weird thing. Time is not quite real, because making a change, even if they're top of the ladder, it doesn't mean starting from scratch. You have all this life experience. And your example there, and not to say that it'll happen overnight, because things may don't happen like that. But when you have a low time preference and are very comfortable with where you are in the moment, then that can be a wonderful new journey.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Huw Edwards, who's going to share his journey of escaping corporate slavery. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life, to wake up energized, excited about the day, to have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want, to be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote is from Darren Hardy. Unsuccessful people carry their goals around in their head like marbles rattling around in a can. And we say a goal that is not written is merely a fantasy. I have to say, marbles rattling around in a can is rather noisy. It would drive me up the wall. And yet that's what many of us do. Live with a noisy mind instead of getting clarity and writing down what we want from life and then figuring out the action steps to get there. Having that plan removes the noise and distractions, and it makes your fantasy a reality. We're going to chat about that today. But before we do, last week's action step was to use awareness. Get in touch with your feelings and watch them. Observe your mind without judgment and just start to separate and say, this reaction is in me. Again, it's back to quieting the noisy marbles in our head. We create our own dungeons, and we have the key to open the door and let go. The choice is ours. You just have to make it. And creating that space and time to think through it is how you do that. I personally have been spending a lot of time on the spiritual side, reading and listening on this very subject. I gotta say, it's not easy, but it is so rewarding. As for us, we're starting a new phase in life as empty nesters, no more obligations to our kids on a daily basis. Looking forward to this next phase of life. Today, we have a question that we are going to chat about with our guest, which is, what does your life look like 15 years from now on your current path? And is that what you want? Most people don't bother to look ahead. All you have to do is look at the people who are where you want to be and ask, is that who I want to be? We're also going to chat about the endless of I will be happy when you can fill in your blank and the stories that we are all told. Another question is, is going to Harvard and Oxford the path to a great life? We're going to find out the answer to that question today as well. Our guest is Huw Edwards, who is the founder of Porthcawl Studios, whose mission it is to liberate overeducated high achievers from corporate slavery. His corporate slavery background includes managing portfolio risk at Ray Dalio's Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world and an organization with one of the most radical, principle-driven cultures in existence. By the way, if you don't know Ray, you should go check out Principles. You should see how he does things and his take on the economy. As someone who once chased and achieved incredible educational and career goals in search of fulfillment, you finally found his purpose as an entrepreneur and an investor, and is uniquely positioned and called to help people like himself navigate their way out of corporate misery to a life of purpose. Let's meet you. Welcome to Richer Soul, Huw Edwards. It's great to have you join us today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, so I grew up in a little village in Wales, rural Wales in the UK. My parents were teachers, maths teacher and physical education teachers. And I would say I had a fabulous upbringing. But when I reflect on my childhood, I don't think I was really taught about money. I was taught about, my teaching about money came from learning about mathematics, learning how to make sums, how to add. So I was very good with calculations. But we didn't really talk much about money beyond just the simplistic of like, I think I was given an allowance. I tried to save that money. The idea of like, deciding something that you want and saving towards it. But I really didn't. And so for me, I think this is pretty common. Like when I reflect about both the sort of formal education of school and then sort of the education, sort of from my parents, it was kind of a little bit on my own until I sort of was out there in the real world and suddenly managing, sort of running my own life.
And that seems to be true everywhere in the world. Most cultures, yes, at least Western cultures, don't really teach their kids about money. And unfortunately, it's a shame. Even though your dad's a math teacher, they're still not teaching the math of finances, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think for me, it was sort of going to university. I sort of discovered sort of the world of finance and the world of finance in London. And that sort of was hugely attractive to me and happy to talk more about that. But like I hadn't to that point really had much interaction with money as a thing.
So what were you doing with finance in London?
I, studied mathematics at university, and I was fortunate enough. I had the privilege of going to Oxford, which is an incredible experience. And when I was looking what to do afterwards, the sort of siren call of London and the sort of financial sector there was strong. And unsurprisingly, with my math background, I ended up working in a derivatives structuring group at Goldman Sachs, where I sort of could apply my mathematical and quantitative background to the creation of products and services to help corporations and organizations hedge their risks.
Okay. Interesting. And I know they're always trying to do that, and Goldman is probably the experts at figuring that out and playing that game.
They certainly are. The thing as well, where for me, that was the big realization was that coming in with an intention to hedge your risks, you have retail stores in Eastern Europe and you generate, euros in revenue there. You're buying product from raw materials, bananas or other produce overseas priced in dollars. That the intention to hedge those risks and those foreign exchange fluctuations is a good intention and a sensible thing to do. What I found though is that just selling a vanilla product for to a company to solve that need doesn't make a lot of money for a company like Goldman Sachs. And so what inevitably happens is you start creating more complicated securities that can help them hedge over a period of time. If certain things happen, the prices go certain directions. And before you know it, it's looking a little less like hedging and a little bit more like speculating on, economic and foreign exchange markets. And the more complicated the products, obviously by the complexity, the more profitability and P&L that a bank like Goldman can make, and the more you can differentiate against the competitors.
Do you need all of that, or is plain vanilla just good enough?
As with everything, it depends, right? And so there is a time and a place for that, more complicated structure. But for me, what it sort of really felt like, it was pushing towards a realm beyond what was truly necessarily needed on a day-to-day basis. And it wasn't so much, there was an asymmetry of information and understanding from the corporate treasurer and their background managing money, managing cash, managing budgets, and our expertise, understanding derivatives, volatility, financial markets. And that was one of the things where, for me, I really wanted to go and be more directly involved in helping businesses and build businesses.
And that makes sense. Yeah, because they're the only business they're helping build is their own, right? Making their own money.
Right, exactly. So. And
while you can make a lot of money doing that, it does not fulfill you with life, probably.
No, it's certainly, when I looked around me at the VPs and partners at the firm, I looked, and those were the people that I wanted to become and wanted to be in 5, 10, 15 years.
And it's smart to look at those people. I don't know how often we do that, is to look around at the people who are 10, 15 years ahead of us in the place that we are and ask that very question. Is this who we want to become? Because if we stay here, this is who we will become.
Exactly. And so often, and, from the following that path from university to a high-powered job, you're at the bottom of the ladder. And so it's very natural then, I was often working 80 to 100-hour weeks. And of course, it was a baptism of fire, and I gained a ton of experience of things that I want and things that I don't want. But often it's easy to lose sight of what you'll become. So because often at your job early on in your career, that's not a great job. That's not the job you want to be doing, but that's part of it. That's on the path. So I always found a good heuristic was to look ahead or well, if I keep this path, am I going to like doing and being who I am and who I become at that point? And if I don't, then I need to make a change now.
Interesting. So you also went to Harvard Business School.
I did.
I would love to know how does that compare with Oxford in the way that they teach?
So some similarities and some differences. So Oxford is known for its tutorial process. So, a lot of the learning was me and maybe another classmate and a professor in a room, sort of one-on-one or two-on-one. And it was, sometimes it felt like I was at Hogwarts, right? I'm in some, old dusty offices with books piled up and an eccentric professor. And it definitely felt academic, right? I would say that. It was an intellectual pursuit. I think then there was the things I sort of learned then was learning from my fellow classmates at Oxford was sort of what people were looking to value and where the herd mentality was, the attraction of places like, London and working in financial institutions. When I went to Harvard Business School, it's all about the Socratic method. And so that was a different kind of atmosphere there where we're, 90 students in a room debating amongst us. And I think one of the amazing things that Harvard Business School does is that it's, 90% plus case method. So you read a case study beforehand and it's a situation. A particular problem that needs to be solved in the business context. And it could be accounting, it could be supply chain, could be marketing, could be strategy, finance, you name it. But inevitably, it's from the perspective of the CEO. And so the joke is that the classic Harvard case study starts with the CEO sitting in his office or her office, staring out the window, pondering the decision that has to be made, And so that was one of the cool parts of the experience there that was very different at Harvard than, say, my time at Oxford, is that we were putting ourselves in that position of this CEO running the company and having to make a decision. And that was doing that over 500 case studies was quite a lot of repetition of trying to think from that seat.
Did they teach you how to think from that seat, and maybe from a couple of different viewpoints, ethics, values, or was it all just dollars and cents and returns, or?
Well, it wasn't just dollars and cents in return, even though that was a big focus. There was, when the time that I went there, a consideration of ethics, a consideration of what is right. But the interesting thing was always from that position of making that decision, which was very useful as an exercise, particularly for later in your career. When you leave Harvard, you then go into a job where you're typically not the CEO. And now you have to actually do the work and be part of other people's decisions. And so that in itself it's kind of ironically challenging. So it prepares you for a point, a decade down the line more than anything.
And you just went to your 10-year anniversary, correct?
We had a reunion. It was virtual.
Okay.
So we had some interactions there.
Yeah, that's the world today, right? Virtual, although it's opening back up and things are coming together. So any insights from going to, 10 years later and looking at the people that are there and thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I still remember the most influential professor and specific talk that professor gave to our class upon our graduation, a couple of weeks before we graduated back in 2011. And that professor made a statement that stuck with me. And he said, "Quit early, quit often. Be the best quitter that you know." And his point was this, that, he made a comment that most of you are going to be miserable in your jobs and in your lives. And you're going to wake up, 10, 20 years later, realizing that you've achieved a lot financially by success metrics, but have not been happy and possibly haven't achieved the happiness in your private life, in your personal life, in your family life, in your relationships with your spouse or children or parents. And so that's the thing there, is realizing how true some of those words are or were. And also how many of my classmates stuck at things a very long time, right? And haven't maybe always quit early. Because that quitting sounds like a bad word for, insecure overachievers like myself. It's like you got to stick it out, you got to push through. And sometimes quitting early is the right thing in order to find that thing that really clicks for you, and that you really are in the right place for you and really your values, your capabilities, your drive.
It's interesting. You said, for an insecure person like you, you've been to Oxford, you've done Harvard Business School. Where does this insecurity come from? I
think, and I say it now quite tongue in cheek, but I saw this, I've experienced this in myself and saw it firsthand with the people that are around me at Oxford and Harvard. Some people who are the top of the 1% in their field or their game and have huge insecurities around that, which is often driving this constant achievement and looking for the next thing. And so for me, when I had a sort of my big sort of revelatory moment back in 2013, when I was working at this hedge fund, the largest hedge fund in the world, Ray Dalio's hedge fund, if you're familiar with his book Principles and his writings. And I was at my lowest of my low, more miserable I've ever been in a work environment. And realizing, that I was trying to fill this sort of gap inside with achievement. I'll be happy when? I'll be happy when I get that job, when I get that degree, when I get that, not quite so much get that car for me personally, but still that, and that, you achieve one thing, then I have to achieve another thing. And so to be able to be sort of quite content in one's own skin has definitely been, a quest, and one of the things that I've, and there's no destination there as well. There's no perfection, like suddenly get there. But in terms of just being able to, like, on a day-to-day basis, be happy within myself has definitely been one of the things that I didn't learn at Harvard Business School.
And that's exactly what Sally talked about when she was on the show, that Harvard did not teach you how to be happy. And school doesn't always teach us how to enjoy life. And they create the insecurities, through what they do and how they teach. And so you've got to learn to kind of step out of that. So what was it like working with Ray Dalio?
So, I mean, in that, I didn't work directly for Ray. I was in the portfolio management department. But it was a brilliant and an awful place to work. I mean, you're being criticized every day for in the pursuit of truth, just knowing who you are and what is the truth of a given situation and a given way, your and others' way of being and behaving. But how it manifested is a feeling for me like I was just being criticized, 24 hours a day, and being truly miserable there. And there was, being around so many other smart, talented, capable, intelligent folks was fascinating and incredible in one aspect, but it was also, crushing, when everyone then their whole purpose then is to almost basically call out what is true from each other, and really just felt, quagmired on a daily basis trying to figure that out, as opposed to getting in a state of flow, getting in the zone, sort of keyed into a vision.
So were they personally criticizing you, or was it more like we're trying to figure out the truth, and so we're constantly challenging everything? Or
definitely the latter. The challenge is that anyone and everyone I've spoken to is intrigued by the concept of somewhere like Bridgewater, because we all, I say we all, a lot of the people that I meet and interact with and I'm friends with, we want to learn from our mistakes. We want to get better. We want to improve. We want to understand what our strengths are and what our weaknesses are. At Bridgewater, it became, for me, very fixated on, where are the weaknesses, what are the mistakes? And it was done in a very unemotional way. It's just trying to find out what is true. It's just being on the receiving end of that is very hard not to take it and internalize it personally. Even if it's not personal, there's a matter of, and for me, I almost felt like, my favorite analogy, it's almost like a game of paintball, right? I'm like every day at the office, I'm just receiving pot shots, in my arm, in my side, of little criticisms about this and that. And whilst none of them are fatal, and it's just that, for me, it really got in the way of sort of like getting in a true state of flow and actually, really embracing and enjoying what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. Just wasn't right for me.
I think that's a big thing, is finding the right fit for you. And for everybody, we're all different. And so part of that is understanding who you are, what you want, and then figuring out where that will come from.
I mean, one of the things that Ray talked about that really resonated with me is a sense of this concept of a hierarchy of values. So that's the big thing at Bridgewater. And at Bridgewater, the top of the hierarchy is truth, and then excellence. And so it's not that, I don't value truth, or someone else who in Bridgewater isn't right for them doesn't value truth. It's like, what is it at the expense of? Is it, for some people, it was in kindness. They couldn't give the harsh feedback to people. For some, they didn't want to receive it. For some, it's like, hey, what do I value more? I want to, in turn, where does that, for me, something like flexibility. I realized for me, and this I think ties into some of, your other guests, etc. I called it flexibility, but in a sense, it's a matter of freedom. At Bridgewater, I felt like a caged animal. the security was through the roof because this was a huge hedge fund with a lot of proprietary information. And what I found out when I was there is that like I could only physically do work at my desk and, with my phone locked up in a little, in a cage outside and all these things, which I realized for me that like one of my biggest values is flexibility, freedom to work from anywhere, be from anywhere at my, time of day. And that just didn't really fit, within that construct there, within some of the demands that are understandable and reasonable for an organization like Bridgewater.
And that makes a lot of sense. So let's take a step back, because you already mentioned this, but and I think this is the one that a lot of people struggle with, which is the I will be happy when.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is if you're not happy now, money isn't going to make you happier.
Absolutely.
And so you've got to create a life that fits that. So what happened? How did you figure out how to be happy?
How did I figure out how to be happy? I mean, the short answer, as with trial and error, I tried a lot of things that I thought would make me happy that didn't make me happy. And in that process, realized that even, academic success, career success, I remember one of them, I started ultra running, started running long distances. And then had experiences there on both sides of like when my goal was the outcome of the race and didn't achieve that, I was deeply unhappy, versus I still remember my best race. I ran races that are 100 miles long in the mountains of Colorado. My best race there, I had, my parents were coming to visit from the UK. And my intention was I wanted to have a smile on my face every time they saw me. And at the end of it, they would say, wow, you really look like, he was obviously really tough and struggling, but, he looked like he had fun out there. And I was like, my priority was to have a slower time and to take longer and have them say that than to have a personal best or a PR. And then be like, well, Huw was a real asshole out there, on the field, right? And the funny thing there is without that fixation on the particular outcome, but rather on the process. And in the moment, I was going to enjoy that step. I was going to smile at that aid station. I had a set of mantras that I would say to myself at different phases of the race. I actually had a great experience and actually had an amazing outcome, but it wasn't driven by the outcome. So for me, it was really starting to pull the realization through a lot of trial and error and experiences of being less fixated about the outcome and the result and more about the process. I know what that process looks like in the moment.
And that kind of goes over to life too, right? You have to enjoy the journey.
You have to enjoy the journey.
Right.
I think the challenge as well is that it's easy to hear that. It's easy to say it. And then in the moment, it's easy to get to lose it, so to speak. I have this lovely phrase that I learned from someone, which is, I'm not a slow learner. I'm just a fast forgetter, right? And this is one of those altruisms about, living in the moment, the journey, not the destination, that, it's easy to live by it and then slightly lose it, to get caught up in an outcome. And I think that that's a sort of a deep habit and pattern that, again, for me is one that started in childhood, growing up, excelling at school. That has been one that, I just have to be mindful of and of seeing that, and I think one of the easiest ways for me to come back here is appreciation, right? Because sometimes if I go, really take stock and appreciate what I have in the moment, what I have today in my life, everything from the people, but even like a glass of water, some fresh air, some sunshine, or the sound of the rain outside, whatever it might be. That's what tends to bring me back. And then I can still then have dreams. I can have visions, but I can appreciate where I am today.
And for most people, especially those listening to this podcast, you have more than most people have had in history. And you have more than most people in the world. And so at the end of the day, if you're not happy and thrilled with your life at this moment, there's only one person to blame, and that's you.
It's an inside job.
It's an inside job. So one of the things that you talk about is escaping corporate slavery. So what's your story there?
So, I've had a few journeys several journeys in corporate life. I spent, my time at Goldman Sachs. We talked a little about at the time at Bridgewater, and I had the opportunity before Bridgewater. What brought me here to where I am today in San Antonio, Texas, to join a tech company called Rackspace that does cloud computing. And I had an awesome experience working at Rackspace. What I realized then, though, is that, I was still working for someone else within a corporate environment. And whilst that one wasn't then, I really contrasted how bad things got when I went to the hedge fund. A couple of years after that, I had the opportunity to buy a business from Rackspace, a business that I had run at Rackspace that I were now selling. And for me, there was a moment there where this was my first sort of foray into, let's call it, entrepreneurship. And for me, I didn't have the lemonade stand. I didn't have the paper round. I wasn't that little entrepreneur as a child. I wasn't promoting parties or, events at university, whatever it might be. And so I think I had been a little wary of entrepreneurship. Oh, I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't have a big idea. But when I had the opportunity with a great friend of mine, colleague, still business partner, and we decided, looked at each other and said, hey, we should buy this business. That was quite transformative for me to then actually be part of something that, that I had true responsibility and autonomy for. And what was fascinating there was that even that first year, I remember I was CFO of that business, and I set up health plans and benefits and all this stuff. I think I was running payroll twice a month, even though I was the CFO. It was like a 20-person company, right? And all those things that might have been, mundane, painful, annoying were actually, but this was our business, right? And there was something quite, there's such a change of framing. And I know, I've experienced myself, and then with so many of my colleagues, in the various companies I've worked over the years, classmates from the places I, had the privilege of studying, who've been miserable in their corporate environments, stuck, going to a place they don't want to go with a boss they don't want to be around. And, there's the whole phrase anyway, right, that most people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses, right? But so often as well, there is like, the nature, of these environments, can feel like, like slavery. I mean, like for early years at Goldman, with the hours, of suffering there, 100-hour weeks was, it really did, it was its own form of, suffering. And so I think realizing that doesn't have to be the way. And that also, it doesn't have to be a matter that, oh, wow, I have to invent the next Google. It's I think there's almost the curse of the, overeducated high achiever is such that like, hey, you can, not realizing you can own a business. You can run a business. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. But you have the opportunity to build something, to empower, an organization, build a team, create a culture, deliver, value to some customers or clients. And I think that can often seem like, certainly for me was like, I didn't realize that was possible in that corporate, stranglehold.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner, and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. Well, because that's what we're told. We're told go to college, then get your MBA, then go work in corporate, and this is what's going to make you happy. And I think there's a lot of fear in running your own business and doing your own thing, but there's a lot of freedom with it too. And if you can figure it out, there are ways to build very small, highly profitable businesses that you don't need 100 people or 1,000 people. You know, you can stay with a very small team and just have fun and make lots of money.
Absolutely. I had a moment recently. So in the past year, I have two businesses today, but I started helping others. I was feeling quite called to help, particularly people who, they have no business being miserable. Right. With the, youth groups, so they have more than, almost anyone else out there, and yet they're unhappy. And, I felt that's a tragedy. And so it started off with, posting on some, online, communicating with people, having people reach out to me, asking me about my story. And I felt a call into to help. And so I've started, I now, coach people to help guide them from this path of corporate suffering to a more empowered life of purpose. And I had a really funny, one of my clients recently made a really funny comment, and it was like, but so you're saying that if I do what I'm doing today, but in a business that I own myself, like that's entrepreneurship? And I was like, he said, is that true? And I was like, well, what do you think? And it was like, well, I guess it is entrepreneurship. I was like, if you feel like it's entrepreneurship, it's entrepreneurship. Who cares what label is on this? And it was a really fascinating thing, because some people, like, you might be working at an investment bank, and really what you want to be doing is selling art, right? Sure. But for some people, and that's great if that's how you figure out and want to go how to find a way to make that into a life, into a profitable artistry, or into a true business. But what I found more interesting with folks is that they actually like the nature of sort of the essence of the business that they're doing. They just don't like that they're doing it inside a big, hamster wheel. Right. And doing it on someone else's dime without their own responsibility, without their own autonomy, and just be able to take that and take it outside can be a somewhat small shift in some ways, but a sort of a monumental shift in terms of perspective and life.
And that's true. I mean, businesses are always hiring outside consultants. Everybody's hiring outside people. And more, the world is becoming a gig economy, going back to that. I shouldn't say becoming, because, a couple hundred years ago, everyone essentially worked for themselves. Right. And there were day laborers and people did it, and they had that freedom. And now we're coming back full circle. One of the things I've heard you talk about is profitable artistry. And I think you just mentioned it before. What does that mean?
Yes. So what I experienced, when I was, trying to find my way, were out of the corporate world and, a place of corporate suffering, was this idea of, well, I'm just going to quit this and go and become a monk. I'm going to quit and go and travel the world or whatnot, or be a nomad, or and this was this sort of, I'm going to quit, and then I'm going to become whatever it might be, become a poor musician. And I think for me it was this idea of artistry being around like the essence of who you are. Like we each have a gift, I believe, here on this planet, and something that we're better at than anyone else, and a type of work that we enjoy doing when we're in our sense of flow. And I think there's this idea, I think it's a myth, that you have to be, well, I've got to do my corporate job and make money so I can do my artistry. right? I can do my passion project on the side. And I want to challenge that to say that I think it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? And that I think there is an essence where, you're actually making a business, making money while doing the thing that you love to do. But in particular as well, I think, and so on one hand, that could be like, hey, I want to, I actually love art and I'm going to create an art business. I've seen an opportunity. I'm going to own an art gallery, buy an art gallery. That might be, but I think there's also this idea that your artistry doesn't have to be art. It doesn't have to be a musician or an artist. It's like, what is like uniquely sort of you? And so that could be like, hey, I was doing, for example, because you mentioned gig economy, someone might be working at a McKinsey, right? And they're doing, consultant job. They might be very good at what they're doing. Probably artistry for them could be going and doing that themselves as a hired gun, only working on the projects that they want, charging, half as much as McKinsey charge, but twice, 4 times as much as what an average consultant, one-person consultant would do, because you're bringing a McKinsey level partner perspective here with a one-on-one, devotion to the client opportunity, taking the clients that you want on your terms. Like now that's profitable artistry there, because if that's what you are meant to do, is to really help solve problems, help clients and companies solve problems, that can be profitable artistry.
And that's what I do now. It just took me a long time to figure it out.
Right.
It's how do you find what your gift is that the world values?
So that's a great question. And I think there's a couple of paths there. Obviously, trial and error is a big part. And so that is where, I often encourage, living by that philosophy of quit early, quit often. If you plan to sort of map it all out and try to come up with a big, matrix, a spreadsheet that's going to tell you what your purpose is, you might be spending a long time before you do something, and then you might not get it right. So I think one is trial and error. Quitting early, quitting often. I think also there's the two things here of like really getting to know who you are. And that's a cliche, right? But it really is, delving in. And I think the value here is doing this with someone else, whether it's a mastermind group, whether it's your couple of friends from college, whether it's with a coach, someone who can guide you through it, of really figuring out how you tick first. And what are the things, like, we are all so unique. We might, like some similar films and some similar books and some similar music, but no one has the same DNA of like interests and passions that each of us have. And figuring that out, and then figuring out and reflecting on where have I actually, done great work. And so I actually like to think then spend a lot of time with people that I work with on visioning, on really like, what is that vision of the future? And not in a like, hey, I have to be this amount of dollars or this amount of thing, but it's like, what does that day look like? Like, let's pick a time in the future, 3 years from now. And what does that look like, that ideal day? And what am I doing? What am I feeling? Who am I with? Who am I spending the time with? How am I spending my time that day? What is the balance between me and work and others and family and work? And doing that work, I find brings out, teases out some of the underlying, aspects that can help someone construct what you just described.
I think people struggle with this whole concept of quit early, quit often, try things and make mistakes because of maybe how society would judge us, how we judge ourselves. And if you're not willing to try different things out, then how do you really know? Absolutely.
And we are born in, this culture has really sort of ingrained us to not fail, right? To not make mistakes. And this is where some of the benefits of sort of the Silicon Valley thinking of like, run fast, break things, or like make mistakes, failure is part of the process. I grew up in the UK where failure is not part of the process. So it's even more like it's, and so I think we're seeing some of the benefits these days of that kind of thinking from startup culture, technology culture. And I do think now, as you described with more of the gig economy, we're seeing more potential for that to try things. And for people to try things without having to, even without having to quit the day job, right? There's a great investor called Manish Pabrai, who's an entrepreneur turned investor. He's a big Warren Buffett fan and follower. Cloner, he might describe. He likes to mimic a lot of how Buffett has structured his life and his various, funds and investment strategies, etc. And I remember reading something from him, and he said when he meets someone who's trying to just do something new, he suggests, don't quit your job. Just do the bare minimum in your day job to not get fired, which might be around about 30 hours a week of work, right? And in his view there is like, right now you have 138 hours left in the week. What are you going to do with those? And start, so there's ways to start experimenting and to start trying new things. And if they fail, they fail.
This whole podcast started as an experiment.
I love it. It's amazing.
At that point, I had a corporate job, but I knew that it wasn't going to last forever. And I knew I wanted to do something new. And so this kind of was what came out of that. And beautiful. Here we are, almost 5 years later, cranking it out, and 180-degree shift in the way that I live my life today. Mm-hmm. And so it's been a fun journey. I think the only regrets are not doing it sooner.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's always the problem. But it was scary. Then there are times where it is scary. But if you build your financial base, then you have the time to launch. And I think that's what happens to too many people. They think they can build a business quickly, and you can't. It takes time to build a business. It takes time to test out ideas and learn the principles. And again, if you're working, it makes it much easier for you to do something on the side, even if you're only doing 5-10 hours a week and working on that. It is definitely helpful. And then it's surrounding yourself with the people who will help you. As you said, I was part of a mastermind. I had a coach that helped me, and I had a whole tremendous support group where I was testing ideas, seeing how other people were doing it. And then eventually I ended up partnering with somebody in the sense that they do a lot of the back office stuff for me. And they provided me all the systems and the branding and everything else. So that made it easy. And then I could just go focus on the parts that I love doing instead of doing it all myself. Exactly.
Finding those Huws, not the hows, right? Mm-hmm. And to really sort of supercharge your endeavors.
So you also work with people in finding their purpose. Do you have a particular system you use? Do you have your own created system? Because I think this is where people struggle.
Yes. So I do. I have a system I've developed, which I am take a select, handful clients through each quarter. It's a 3-month program. And really, it's 3 steps to it, right? And it sort of lines into, when you were asking earlier, I mean, the first step is a step of awareness, getting to know themselves. And, I've had a lot of different experiences. I've tried a lot of things. I've had some great coaches, great programs, great mentors. So within that, there is a large amount of journaling. Because I think journaling is a really powerful way, particularly for overeducated high achievers who tend to think too much. Spending time just journaling, and this can be both focused journaling, but also free journaling, where you'd get your thinking mind out of the way, is a key thing. And then obviously meditation, taking time to reflect, go within there. I think the second part of the program is vehicle selection, right? So once you've, in that first month, really get into like a real sense of what your vision is. Where do you really want to be? And it's not what you want to have, but it's like, where do you want to be? How do you want to be living your life, with whom and on what terms? What does that really look and what does that feel like? How then, this next question is, how do I make it a reality? And so that's for me where, particularly for my audience, like I only work with, the people who are at the top of their field, who have, are very much, overeducated, overachieving, the best of what they're doing, but they're stuck. They're stuck, climbing up a ladder and it's against the wrong wall, right? So then they reach, and often I'm speaking to them after they've reached the top of the ladder, right? And they're like, oh my God, right? I say nearly the top, I think it's like where there's still, so still plenty of life, ahead of them. And so the real question then is, okay, how do I now have a sense of a vision. I know where I am today and I don't want that anymore. I'm not going to try and just struggle and do it myself. I'm going to, I find a coach, find a tribe. So how do I select the vehicle? And that's where, for me, with the people I work with, specifically is really valuable, is that, I help people see the opportunity to buy businesses. And so often there are a lot of people, my clients, they're working in corporate environments where often that business is right under their nose. It's within the company that they're working at. It's that redheaded stepchild of a business unit that people don't really like and the corporation would actually like to get rid of. And often provides this unique opportunity to go to the company and say, hey, I'd like to buy that business. I'll raise money from the bank, from some investors, and take that off your hands, and really now focus on building this business on its own 2 feet. And so I think that's one way of my sweet spot. The other one as well then is that's just one vehicle. There are lots of other vehicles, and I think the gig economy has really exploded that potentiality there of what that could look like. And it could be how it's so easy now to create an e-commerce business. It's so easy now to create a consulting business in your particular niche where you find a way to really connect with that ideal customer where you can add incredible value. And then the final part then of the 3-month program then is execution. Now, how really helping them make this a reality. You've selected the vehicle. What are the steps now to actually activate on this? And and that's not necessarily immediately quitting their job, though that could be part of the path, depending how it looks. But it's like, okay, now let's make this a reality. And how can working with me, and how can I help you, connect you with others to make this successful? And that's it.
And it takes time, and it takes getting out of your own way, and it takes a little bit of a leap of faith to understand. But there are people who do this all the time, and that's just the reality of it. But we don't talk about it enough, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. And there are several of these cliches, but there's quite some truth in them. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think there's a key thing here of you can try and struggle and do it on your own, and maybe you get there, or you can ask for help. You can seek out the people who've done it. So it's, almost taken back again to that 10 years, when I was, back in my early career, looking at the people, who are 10 years ahead. Where do I want to be today? Who are the people who are there, and how can I get their help? And how can I surround myself with people who are there, and also with other people? I think this idea of having the tribe is so powerful. So being able to hey, I'm not just on my own, but I have half a dozen other like-minded folks trying to find their profitable artistry together, as a sort of a cohort. And then having, under the, but still having a guide, and still having people like you and the people who you have on your podcast as inspiration on this journey.
And it is a journey. I mean, you have to take the time to think it through. I would just hate to climb a ladder and realize that when I got to the top, I picked the wrong one. That's unfortunately something that goes back to education, where we started. Nobody is teaching kids to pick their ladder, and most people, they have a vision of what they think doing something is, but they don't actually go look at the reality of what doing something is. And the people who are smart enough to say, this is what I'm thinking of doing, let me go talk to some people doing it, and realizing, oh, that's not what I expected. That's not what I thought. And I didn't realize this is what it took to get to the top of this ladder. And then you can make a better decision.
Absolutely. I've heard Deepak Chopra talk about raising his children. And I remember, he said, there's only one thing: you can go to school, don't go to school. He put no pressure on them to do one thing or the other. But his one thing was like, you have one goal, one quest. You have a unique gift, a unique purpose for being on this planet that no one else has. And your quest is to figure that out. And that was he set that quest for them as they were children, not as like most of us try to suddenly realize that that's our quest when we're already, 3/4 of the way up a ladder, right? Someone else's ladder. And so I think there is so much to be said, like you said, about encouraging our children and our youth to start that quest earlier on, and to look at like what those lives, what those ways of being will become. But at the same time, even when you're 3/4 or at the top of the ladder, this is where time is, this time is this weird thing. Time is not quite real, because making a change, even if you're top of the ladder, it doesn't mean starting from scratch. You have all this life experience. And, your example there, and not to say that it'll happen overnight, because things may don't happen like that. But when you have a low time preference and are very comfortable with where you are in the moment, then that can be a wonderful new journey.
Not easy, but doable. And you have to create the space and the time to be able to do that. You kind of touched a little bit on this, though. Meditation was a big part of this, wasn't it? Your journey.
It really was. And it's funny, it's one of those other things I will give credit to and say thank you to Ray Dalio. I came across, I'd never meditated. I thought I never really knew about meditation. Then I just assumed it was something kooky and who knows. And then I assumed I wouldn't be able to do it. And when I was at Bridgewater, you have the largest hedge fund in the world, this founder, who has built this, hedge fund that has the best returns. And he attributes his success to meditation and encourages, employees and everyone who works with him to meditate. And so now I was at my lowest of my low, and I was looking for anything, and I found it in meditation. And I finally found some quiet, and I found that I could take a respite from whatever stress and, anxiety and fear and overwhelm of the moment. And then I found it gave me clarity. I found it gave me space for new ideas. It was without a doubt, I attribute a lot of, coming to find my purpose and finding my way to meditation.
And I think people don't always understand meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share what meditation means to you?
Yes. So meditation means to me taking time out of my busy life, out of life of responsibilities and demands and distractions for myself, to sit in silence, in solitude, and to take a break from everything that's going around. And then being okay that I'll have lots of thoughts. It might not always be pleasant because my mind might be racing. I'm certainly this idea that meditation, you sit down and some Zen experience. Sure, I've had the occasional time like that, but more often than not, I'm sitting there and my mind is burning. But I know for that period, I am taking time for me. And then when I come and when that ends, I feel more settled, more grounded, more ready to, go about whatever else is going to come into my experience that day. And there's something about prioritizing that time. And there's something lovely at Bridgewater. Bridgewater had meditation rooms. They had little rooms, and I set it on my calendar at 3:00 every day. And so for me, I would get up and I would walk and I would go and I'd sit for 20 minutes and then come back. And it was like I was ready for the second half of the day now.
Me time. We all need a little me time, right?
A little me time, exactly. A little me time. And to be able to then bring my best to everyone else and everything else in my life. And that it's one of those ones that 20 minutes now is worth, 2 hours later. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not 20 minutes away from my partner or my work or my family. It's actually creating more time.
And that makes sense. Based on our conversation, what is one action step people can take to move forward this week?
I would suggest, based on what we just said here, to take a few moments every morning to prioritize themselves and just sit for 5 minutes and just take a break themselves. And it's an act, not just the act of the silence and the quiet, but it's the act of like prioritizing yourself.
And that makes total sense. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Appreciation and gratitude.
Gratitude comes up a lot. And appreciation and gratitude are very, very similar. And I have learned to do that much more so. And it really brings a lot of peace.
I agree. I think appreciation in particular, gratitude is amazing, and I often go to gratitude, but gratitude often has some conditionality to it. I'm grateful for X because X happened. And for me, what I love about appreciation is just appreciating whatever it is for what it is in this moment.
Interesting. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I wish I had learned to meditate sooner and find that little silence within.
Another thing they don't teach at Harvard Business School, right?
No, they do not teach that at Harvard Business School.
Yale does have a class on happiness. I hear it's very, very, very popular there.
The one thing as well, though, there's that whole phrase like when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I think there was a class at Harvard Business School on authentic leadership development. And I believe maybe they taught, more about happiness and meditation in that class, but I didn't take that class, so.
Well, I think Sean Aker was out of Harvard, right? Do you know him? He did a lot of psychology work there. He wrote a couple of books. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
One specific piece of wisdom: quit early, quit often.
There you go.
I mean, it goes back to the whole, I think it was Mark Twain who said, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Sometimes you just got to try it and learn. And
you do. And I think for too many 18-year-olds, they're not given that advice of try different things, test it out. Instead, they're told, pick a college, pick a major, you're on a track. Good luck.
Exactly.
And hopefully that's changing. If people would like to find you, connect, learn more about your coaching services and your companies, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can find me at bridgemethod.com. That's bridge with a B, bridgemethod.com. And find me on LinkedIn under my name, Huw Edwards, Huw Edwards. And feel free to send me a message, connect. That's the best place to get hold of me.
And we will put that in the show notes to make it easy for people. Thank you so much for joining us today, Huw.
Oh, thank you so much, Rocky. It's a privilege to be on here, and I really enjoyed and appreciate having this conversation today.
We all chase a path we're told leads to success. But the price we have to pay in real success is usually not found based on what other people tell us. We need to create our own path and take action. I love this idea of fail fast, fail often. It's about trying things out and seeing what happens. Go ahead and look ahead at the path you're on and ask yourself, is this really what I want? Create the clarity of your goals and write them down. Then work backwards and create those action steps. This week's action step was to take a break. Take 5 minutes to sit and prioritize your day. I have to tell you, it's a game changer. And it's big, taking the time off and thinking about life and making those bigger decisions. Also, take the time to meditate. It's really nothing more than being lost in your own thoughts and having the time to think and check in with yourself. And ask yourself, is that really true? Next week's episode is the Good Money Framework with Derek Kinney. We chat about common sense with money and our money mindsets, which really change everything. Hey, if you enjoyed this, you know people who are stuck in corporate slavery, why not share it? I think it will help them and they'll appreciate you for it. And go ahead and tag me if you share it on social media. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.